Despite the Paris Accords, greenhouse gas emissions have continued their steady rise. There are no penalties for missing the targets, and so nations are not meeting them. The prevailing wisdom is that unless everybody does it, nobody will do it, and since the accords are being ignored, it's not going to happen. This presumes that any nation going it alone can't compete in global markets. Consider, however, that the first places to implement an effective green agenda will fare the best in the end. The early adopters will enjoy a slower, less disruptive transition. Real sustainability requires real reductions in emissions, or, to look at it another way, real reductions in resource consumption. It hardly matters which resources. They all require energy to extract and refine, so reducing resource consumption generally is the place to start. Nations making the transition can tax resources at the point of extraction or import. Taxes would be set at levels that reflect the damage each resource causes by its extraction and use. They will accumulate on goods and ultimately be paid by the final consumer, as with a value-added tax. Resource taxes will fall heavily on the rich, as they are the largest per capita consumers. Income taxes on low earners can be reduced as revenues from resource taxes increase. So what are the best strategies to reduce resource consumption and emissions? 2 centuries ago, we used essentially no fossil fuels. Ecological burdens were modest, and ecosystems were approximately sustainable. Water and wind energy were used for milling, and solar energy was used to dry crops. Firewood provided winter heating, and ships were sail-driven. Horses and other draft animals provided small but important amounts of power. This was how society adapted to the universal scarcity of energy prior to large-scale coal mining. We need a sustainable economy that will resemble olden times in some respects, but differ radically in others. When developing transition strategies, we should first review the practices employed 2 centuries ago. Then we need to consider how modern technology can augment the old methods while reducing emissions to net zero. Cities in particular have very large environmental impacts. In the past, the principal building materials were wood and stone, with wood-fired kilns producing bricks and quicklime for mortar. Reinforced concrete was unknown. Protective city walls required a relatively large and dense population to build and defend them. This requirement gave rise to the typical medieval urban form: narrow streets, 2 to 5-story buildings, and a few central squares. Green space began immediately outside the walls. This urban form can still be seen in preserved city centers, which usually remain the most valued parts of their cities. Take Haarlem in the Netherlands as an example. The old city is little changed in 5 centuries. The streets are narrow, the buildings are 2 to 4 stories tall, and most open onto small interior courtyards. Once the fire dangers of wood construction had been recognized, buildings were made mostly of brick. Floor and roof structures were wood, with clay roof tiles replacing flammable thatch. Car-free cities are the cheapest to build and operate of all known city forms. The mere purchase, fueling, and maintenance of urban cars is an enormous cost, to which we must add the land given over to their movement and parking. This is to say nothing of their danger and toxic emissions. The car-free urban form is the only practical choice for the resettlement of millions of climate refugees within an economically short time span. There is no cheaper way to build decent cities. No other urban form has lower environmental impacts. Finally, the quality of urban life is always improved by removing cars. Savings from the phased transition of existing cities to the car-free model begin almost immediately, and the initial cost is low. In the longer term, better public transport will be required. This can be provided in the same way that was rapidly adopted starting about 1890, by the installation of simple street-running electric trams. Today, however, we can power these trams with batteries, which saves the cost and ugliness of an overhead power supply. A major transition to sustainable societies must occur in the next 20 years if humanity is to stave off the worst effects of climate change. Efficient use of resources and compact car-free cities are essential to this transition. An early start will produce the best result, even if others are not yet ready to begin. If your national government is not ready to act, urge local officials to get started. Every day sooner is that much less CO2.